Hello and welcome to another spot interview with one of the creators of the scenarios for the new and upcoming horror guide for Kult Divinity Lost. I am joined today by Martyna Martial, one of the writers who has a long history of doing amazing things.
Oh, hello, everyone. So a few words about me. I've been into tabletop gaming for about 20 years by now, while Cult is perhaps the best scenario to be published by me. I've been playing and game mastering for quite some time, and horror specifically has been one of the genres that has always been very dear to me. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity to write for Cult.
I got a chance to look at Downfall, look over it, and let me tell everyone this is going to be an amazing scenario. But what was kind of the inception? What started you on the idea of writing Downfall?
So one of the things that always intrigue me, specifically in horror, is how it intertwines with the theme of passion and sexuality. And this is something that was one of the sparks inspiring Downfall, combined with the lore content that I already knew from the previous editions of Cult, which I also read in the past, and this was it.
Awesome. So can you just kind of give a brief description of what Downfall is for those who might have not have checked out the Kickstarter?
Downfall is a scenario about how passion can lead you astray if you are not careful in following it. And this is not only true for the character Noah, who goes missing in the story, but also for the player characters who each have their own potentially destructive passions and must be very careful about how they go about pursuing them and whether they even decide to pursue them, knowing the potential consequences.
So I was kind of looking over the things that you sent me, and something that kind of resonated to me was that you were a huge fan of Asian supernatural horror. What are some kind of the any inspirations you've kind of got from that genre?
So, when it comes to Asian horror, I really like the theme of the supernatural lingering at the edges of reality and always being present there somehow, sort of seeping into our world and just intertwining with ours, with the usual things that seem familiar to us at first. But once we start interacting with them, digging deeper, it turns out that there might be something more that is uncanny and unsettling for us. So this is one of the themes that I really like about Asian horror, the mundane becoming sort of threatening and suddenly changing our perspective on the world as we know it.
It's kind of like some of your favorite movies, or books, or any sort of literature from the genre.
So my all-time favorite is perhaps pretty mainstream, and it's The Ring, both the movie and the book series. The book series actually goes across several genres, starting with horror and ending somewhere closer to science fiction. And I really recommend it if you haven't read it yet. But when it comes to the movie, I watched it when I was a very young viewer, and the scene where Sadako crawls out of the TV was just one of the most terrifying horror things I have ever seen, and it just stayed with me until my adult years.
That is awesome. I remember when The Ring came out in America, and it was during a snowstorm. So we did not have power for about 2 weeks, and during the whole time, we were forced to sleep in the living room with huge things of cloth covering the entryways. And it was during that time when I was first introduced to Asian horror via The Ring. We were the only ones in the theater, and that night I greatly regretted it because I had to sleep in front of a TV. Um, yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites as well.
I used to have a TV on like a very high up shelf in my room, so I always imagined imagine that, okay, when she comes and she's got to crawl out of that TV, she'll just face plant into the floor and I'm fine.
Yes. Did you know that there is they have a movie featuring the girl from The Ring and the girl from The Grudge fighting each other?
Yes, it's fantastic. I loved it.
I just saw it. I was like, "Oh, this looks cool." Kind of in your opinion, I mean, you love horror, and there's definitely a lot of different genres you enjoy: gothic fiction, H.P. Lovecraft. Of course, we talked about the Asian horror, B-class movies. I'm kind of curious about Killer Shrews. But like, what are kind of your favorite aspects of each kind of theme genre of horror? What kind of brings you in from each, and how do you think they're different? I mean, it's such a wide variety of things.
Yeah, so to me personally, the scariest horror is the one that's sort of probable enough that it lingers with you. And this is something I find in Asian horror. And if you delve deeper into Asian cultures, you know that they are focused on the supernatural coexisting with our world. So when you think about that, there might be a monster under your bed, and that's fine. It's just there. But when it comes to the other genres, for example, I'm not a huge fan of body horror, which may be surprising once you read the Downfall, seeing as there are quite a few bits and pieces of it, quite literally. But this is another kind of horror that I find well, I'm pretty squeamish when it comes to body horror. I'm going to say this. When I see torture or anything, I'm that viewer who looks away first. And this is a different reaction, this kind of almost physical repulsion that just makes you turn away from the screen, or, I don't know, close a book, because this is just too much and you start to feel your fingers tingle and, you know, your eyes do weird things when you think about what could be happening to them.
I remember watching Hostel, and that was a tough one to watch. It's a lot of body horror, and definitely like a movie like Human Centipede still gives me shivers.
Yeah, I had similar difficulties with Saw or like Antichrist. Those were tough.
And I also see that we kind of have a lot of similarities in terms of the games that we like. You mentioned Call of Cthulhu, World of Darkness. Bluebeard's Bride, of course, is one of my favorites, as well, along with Monster Hearts and Starcross.
Yes, it's a pretty wide range, going from horror to cosmic horror to teenage drama, which is my second favorite genre. And for example, Monster Hearts is a good combination of both. Sort of.
So, like for games like Monster Hearts and kind of going between that, Starcrossed and Kult and Bluebeard's Bride, would you say it's kind of a palate cleanser, or more so just kind of more things you enjoy?
I think it's more things I enjoy. Sure, playing dark games and disturbing games all the time can be exhausting, and you need something different. Even if to get a fresh perspective on the dark and disturbing, and to go back with it and sort of refresh your capacity for being scared. Because I think this is one of the challenges when you are really rooted in a horror genre, and I don't know, you watch a lot of horror and you read a lot of horror, your tolerance threshold is going higher and higher, and eventually, you know, there is this torture porn happening on screen and you're just eating popcorn like, okay, yeah. And this is not what I want, because I love horror, because I love being afraid. So when I run horror games and when I write scenarios, I try to reach for the things that personally scare me or that personally disturb me. And this is my recipe. So when I go to lighter games like Monster Hearts or Starcrossed, I'm looking for a different kind of experience, of course, to have fun, but also to sort of lower the threshold for coming back to horror after a break.
Good idea. I mean, definitely as someone who also kind of enjoys horror and can just dive into it, it's very important to kind of just take a step back and let yourself get scared again, which is, I think, part of that horror contract is letting yourself be scared instead of kind of tensing up for it. You kind of lose some enjoyment on that. But one of the things, like especially with Cult and I mean Bluebeard's Bride, is making sure that everyone at the table feels safe. And I love that you kind of in the info dump you sent me are adamant about the X card. What's kind of other safety tools, and why do you think the X card is so important for especially these horror games that we play?
Yeah, so for me, all kind of gaming, not only horror, but perhaps horror especially, should be safe, sane, and consensual.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why I think that all these safety measures are very, very important. And apart from the X card, you may also be familiar with the Consent in Gaming
Mm-hmm.
by Montecook, which
Yeah.
also arms you with a great checklist for potential triggers and topics that you should avoid in games. And I think that if you want to run heavy games, dark games, which may touch upon topics that will be uncomfortable for your players, it is really necessary to talk about it even before the game, to use the trigger warnings, which you will also find in Downfall, and to warn your players what kind of a ride they are signing up for, so they can make a conscious decision to participate in your game. But again, even if you have consent of the whole group, mechanisms like the X card give you the liberty to, play as dark and as hard as you want, knowing that the players have the safe word mechanism to use whenever they start to feel that this is too much or that the game is getting too uncomfortable for them to continue. So I think it's a great tool also for the game masters, because I know I can go further whenever I run a horror games, and I trust my players to use the safety mechanisms whenever they feel uncomfortable and they feel that they need them.
Yeah, definitely. It does let you kind of rely kind of on the players to help make sure that everything stays safe and everyone's still having fun. It's definitely a mechanic I love using and will continue to use. Because definitely, whether like you said, it's Cult or even Monster Hearts or Starcrossed, or you're just playing Dungeons and Dragons, you want to make sure that everyone comes to it in a very safe and consensual manner, and you don't know everything that's gone on in the other person's life. And really, it's just kind of about empathy and compassion.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note that the game master can also use the X card and say, look, my dear player, I'm not okay with this. Let's drop this topic, or let's drop the scene. I'm not okay with this being in my game. So I think it's also important to highlight that this is as much a tool for players as it is for
Yes.
the game master.
Definitely. GMs, you do not have to, as people say, suck it up. You are as much of a part of the safety mechanics as the players itself. I mean, I know for me, I was running one of the Cult scenarios last week, and it was during Nazi Germany, and I did not feel comfortable about doing the salute, even though it was something I've seen in movies and something that people I think expect from them in general. But like, I can't do that, and I don't think it's bad for anyone else to do it in the scope of a role playing game or an actor or stuff like that. But just because I'm uncomfortable with it, and that's cool. That's kind of part of role playing, and it's definitely something that people should kind of get behind a little bit more. But yeah, it was really cool to see that and to just kind of see the adamant approach to safety in mechanics, which has always been something I've been a fan of.
Yes, me too. I'm really happy that it's becoming an increasingly more popular topic, and that more and more groups are adopting various safety mechanisms, from, I don't know, having a conversation before the game to introducing the X card or the consent card.
And this kind of goes back to the scenario of Downfall, which you explore sexuality and stuff like that. How do you kind of approach, such a sensitive topic, especially, I mean, coming from the West as an American, it's super sensitive in our country. But how do you approach it in, I guess, a way that's mature, but also kind of gets to the point?
So I think the core of talking about, or maybe role-playing sexuality, is not to make it pornographic when it's not necessary. Because sexuality is as much about the experience of passion, of lust, of sensuality, and the draw to another person or to a new experience. And I think that delving into these topics and exploring sexuality in terms of a desire is much more fulfilling and interesting that being very direct or maybe very literal about what goes where and how it works. So this is how I try to approach it in Downfall, and show it as a kind of passion that may be really intense for some of the character and difficult to resist, and that they struggle with as they try to explore the depths of sexuality that may be more transgressive or perhaps even dangerous or illegal in some of the aspects, and to show how it influences them as people and how it changes them along the way.
And what kind of inspirations do you have in terms of exploring sexuality? I don't know many like video games, movies, or books that kind of do it in a good way, and I'm really curious, kind of what do you draw upon?
Okay, so this is going to be a bit of a coming out, but as my pastime, I do like to write erotica, and I also read it, because if you want to write something, you should be reading it as well.
Yep.
So a lot of what you find in Downfall will be somehow inspired by the erotic literature, especially the kind that is maybe a bit more into the BDSM or kink genres. I'm not saying this in connection to Downfall to say that BDSM is transgressive in any way.
Yeah.
But when it comes to exploring sensuality, themes like sadism and masochism, and how people experience emotions during, for example, this kind of play, this I think is a very intense experience and something very interesting to look into and to immerse oneself into. So I was really looking into Downfall inspirations in the more, let's say, sensual part of the literature pertaining to erotica and sexuality.
But I am curious, how did you start in writing erotica?
That's perhaps a pretty long story. Okay, I started from being a person who really didn't like romance. Why? Because when you watch romantic comedies, they're all sort of following the same boy meets girl script, and you have the same tropes rehashed. And when you're a person who may be interesting to explore something less heteronormative or less, I don't know, mainstream, let's call it, you have to look elsewhere. And I was one of those people who are like, okay, I'm not really a huge fan of those boy meets girl stories. Not saying there is anything wrong with them, but I'm just not so much into them. So what else is out there? And I started digging. I went into, I don't know, erotic literature that's, for example, written by authors more focused on, I don't know, homoeroticism or freeways, or like I said, the BDSM scene. And there I found things that were different, that were somehow fresh. And that inspired me to also start writing and to start exploring these themes myself.
Very interesting. Like it's definitely something that has always been captivating for me, and I'm sure other people as well. So it's really cool seeing that kind of jump from the writing of erotica to kind of and bringing that experience, at least from my perspective, bringing that experience to writing role-playing scenarios. It sounds very interesting. I'm super excited about Downfall. The more I hear about it, especially after I've read it. So everyone who hasn't gotten a chance to look at the synopsis on the Kickstarter, please do, and definitely check out and pledge, because you're gonna want this scenario. It's definitely an amazing unique perspective to cult and to sexuality. So I have one more question, and it might not surprise you. I see that you like to collect flamingo merch.
Yes, I do. And I think it's safe to say that whenever you are in my apartment, there will be at least one flamingo within an arm's reach.
All right, can I see one of these flamingos?
All right, sure, no problem. I'm prepared for this.
Yeah, excellent.
Here we go.
Oh, that is super cute. Do you have any last words for the viewers, people watching, cult fans, horror aficionados before we head out?
So one thing I think I'd like to close with is if you are interested in playing Downfall, really talk to your group, talk to your players, because this scenario touches upon difficult topics, and as you will see, the list of trigger warnings is pretty long for that one. So have this conversation, let them know what kind of a ride they are up to, that perhaps the characters they are going to play are not always going to be nice people, and this isn't necessarily a game about nice people having fun together. So employ the safety mechanisms, go through the trigger warnings, have this conversation before you play Downfall, because this is a dark scenario, and it was designed to disturb and to delve into topics that may be heavy and that may be difficult. So I recommend to have a conversation about it before and perhaps after the game as a debrief as well.
Excellent words. On behalf of Helmgas, thank you so much, Martyna, for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to speak to such creative and wonderful people. Also, thank you for TTRPG Theater for hosting us and making this whole thing possible. And of course, check out the Kickstarter. All the links and information can be found just below here. And I'm super excited to be running this game one day. It's going to be amazing. And we hope to see you guys for another show sometime.
Bye. Thank you so much for having me. Bye-bye.